is everywhere. Home is nowhere. If that resonates, you're in the right place. Welcome to Nomadic Diaries. I'm Doreen, and this is where your story belongs. Today, it is my excitement. I am so excited to introduce you to my friend, Adrienne Belaire.
Hi.
I'm so excited that we're finally doing this. Now, Adrienne is currently living and her full-time residence is Saudi Arabia. We have known each other for about 23, 24 years, I believe, when you first moved back to Saudi.
Yes.
Yeah, is that right?
Yes.
Adrienne is a wife, a mother, a potter, an artist, an amazing scrapbooker, but most of all, she has been a real light in the field of raising three very wonderful third culture kids who are now young adults overseas in Saudi Arabia. Can you paint a picture of what your life was like in Saudi Arabia and a couple of paragraphs about your growing up years? And did you live on a compound? What was that like? Did you go to school on a camel? What was that like?
Yes. Well, I actually moved to Saudi Arabia when I was in first grade. And then I was there until right before I was going to college. So all of my formative years. And I lived in a place called Rastanura from 1974 until 1980. And then in 1980, I was about to start seventh grade, and we moved to a very small compound called Udalia. And I was there from 80 to 86. And living in Saudi, I always say, is a little bit kind of like 1950s America, very safe, small community of like-minded people. Everybody there kind of has to have a sense of adventure to be able to have gone there in the first place. And two-parent families usually. So it looks a little bit different than what it would have looked like to grow up in the States because everybody was there kind of with families intact. And growing up, it was mostly American and British. And then since I've been back as an adult, it is so much more international, and has just been a beautiful place for me to raise our kids with my husband. So that's been really a treat.
You know, the contrast, you've seen it over the decades now. You've watched it like through 4 or 5 decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure you really are aware of that. Now, tell me about the circumstances around leaving Saudi Arabia when you were in 86, when you left Saudi Arabia. Tell us about that. Why did you leave? Were your parents still there? What were the circumstances around that?
Yeah, the circumstances that we left were actually really not ideal. Udalia was closing. That was a time when oil prices had plummeted, and they basically surplused the entire compound. So everybody was let go. And as a kid, I think that was a really, really difficult situation because there was no internet. There was no, you couldn't, you had no way of keeping your community together. So everybody, it felt like taking marbles and just throwing them on the floor, and everybody was just gone. And so for years, I would try to keep up with people with their addresses. I would write Christmas cards and stuff like that. But the thing is that, people would move and then you'd never know where they ended up. You'd get the cards returned and,
Yes.
return to sender kind of thing because their address had changed. And so it was really, it was a very, very difficult transition for us. First, because it was so sudden. And secondly, because we didn't really have any information about what that transition was going to look like and feel like. And it proved very, very, very difficult for us.
Now, did you go back with your family intact? All of you left at the same time, correct?
Yes, we left actually, to tell you the truth, it was kind of an interesting situation. I was getting ready. I had just graduated from high school and I was in a panic because I was feeling like, I'm never going to travel again. So for totally the wrong reasons, I went on a missions trip. I went on a missions trip to Ecuador and Peru. And so when I was returning from Peru and Ecuador, I remember flying into Denver and realizing like, I'm not going home. Like, I'm going to this home where I've never even been. I've never even seen it. And it was such a just really weird feeling, really a weird feeling to be going somewhere that was supposed to be home, but really not. And it was really unsettling.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I remember that feeling.
Yeah.
So my next question is, did you go to boarding school for your high school?
I did. I went to boarding school and I ended up my first year. I went to I actually went out a year early and I went to a performing arts boarding school. It was an all girls school and it was very much, in growing up in Saudi, you're really kind of a big fish in a little pond. And it was the first time for me to be in a situation where, like, even though I was a good gymnast in Saudi, I really was not a good gymnast compared to these girls who had been doing it their entire life and had amazing coaches. And like, that was really hard. And the other thing that was really hard was that I also was not prepared for how the weather would affect me, which really sounds silly, but growing up in Saudi, it's sunshine all the time. And I had never even given two thoughts to how the darkness and the weather would affect me. And I was really depressed there. It was a school in New England, in Boston, right outside of Boston. And so I wasn't really prepared for the winter season. I wasn't prepared for that. Sure. I ended up coming back early. I ended up coming back from that school and going back home. And that, I think it was also partly, nobody there really knew me. And they put me, because I was a foreign student, quote unquote, they put me with a foreign roommate, which is fine, except for my roommate didn't speak any English. She was Japanese. Her name was Keiko Manami. And so I would cry because I was so homesick and so depressed. And she would say, "It okay. And as a side thing, I ended up teaching English in Japan after I graduated from college, and I was able to reconnect with her. And she said, now she can speak perfect English. And she said, I felt so bad because I couldn't say anything. I didn't know how to speak English yet. So that was
But
hard.
she
And
could
then,
try.
yes. And then I transferred I stayed in Udalia. I really, graduating from ninth grade is a really big deal in Saudi. And I had gone out a year early. And so I don't think I realized how much I was going to really miss that aspect. It was such a big,
Yes.
like, life event. And so I was super
Yeah.
homesick and I needed to be home. And so anyway, I came back in February, finished out the year, went to a totally different boarding school. And this boarding school was in Wisconsin. It was still cold, but it wasn't dark. And there were also other students there that were from Aramco, that
And
were
that
from
really helped.
Saudi. And that
Yes.
made such a huge difference.
Yes.
So like people kind of, even though if might not have known them before, you all had that common bond of having grown up overseas. And I knew some of the people that were from Rastanura. And so that was a really great experience. And I loved that school. So that was good.
Excellent. So, when you first returned to the US, what surprised you? Now, you had been in the US as a boarding school student,
Yes.
but I'm guessing you still felt very tethered emotionally to Saudi, of course, because your family,
Yes.
parents, and everyone was there. So, what surprised you when you ultimately did all leave? What was surprising thing? I know there were many. You can give us
Yes.
a surprise that just shocked you.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is I remember going to the grocery store, and I mean, it was just so like, I mean, I was a college kid, and like, I just remember filling my cart and then being like, I don't have enough money to pay for all of this. Like it was so much of an overload of like choice.
Yes.
In Saudi growing up, especially in RT at that time, we had choices like, do you want fat milk or skinny milk? And actually at that time we had like long life milk, which was just,
I remember that in the boxes, blue and
yes,
white
in the
boxes.
boxes. The Domo milk. Before that, we only had dry milk, which I just still have PTSD from. With my mom would mix it up and then pour it on the cereal, and there was still so gross.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I just remember, you had choices like, do you want Cheerios or cornflakes? That was
Yeah.
it. So coming back, even now, still, it proves to be a little bit of a challenge. It's a little bit overwhelming when you look down the cereal aisle and it is cereal from here to forever, so many different kinds you can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So that part was super challenging for me. The other thing that I think on a more personal level that was really challenging was that um, I found that I was having trouble connecting with people. I I couldn't understand why I wasn't making friends, why I wasn't like, everything seemed very surfacey, and I couldn't get deeper. And
Yeah.
I didn't understand what was wrong. And I felt like I was hitting my head against the wall, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't make roots. And it wasn't until I moved back to Saudi where I realized like it wasn't me. It was that I was in such a different situation. And when I'm overseas, it's hard to put it into words. There's just this immediate way
Connect.
of
Yeah.
communication that you're standing
Yes.
in line at the grocery store and you're talking to somebody and you're like, hey, we're having a get together on Friday. why don't you go ahead and come over and bring your kids? We're doing a music night. And you just met this person. But
Yes. Yeah.
there's that immediate
Bonding.
level of connection that you have. And I feel like when I moved back to the States, I looked the same as everybody else and I sounded the same as everybody else. But my heart and my mind were so different than everybody else. And the way that I saw the world and the things that I thought were interesting were just very different than, yeah, it just wasn't. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like elitist, because that's not what it was. It was just that I just saw the world so differently.
Yes. Yeah. I think that we rearrange our insides, we rearrange our souls. I kind of think of it as a soul situation, and it's almost like our souls are so influenced and our senses are so influenced by different sounds, smells, tastes, that we get rearranged at our subconscious level. And of course, nobody can see that. I always felt very strange in America because I always felt like a foreigner, but they
Yes.
treated me like I wasn't. So that's a very common,
Yes.
that's a
Yes.
very, very common situation, I think, for us returnees.
They
So
call it a hidden immigrant.
hidden
And I
immigrants.
find that a hidden immigrant, and I feel that at such a soul level, I feel
Yeah,
that
yeah.
really deeply.
Yes, and then there's the topic of hidden grief, but we'll get to that in a bit. So you actually, just as a little bit of background, I would like to insert this here. You left Saudi Arabia for how many years before you returned to have a family and raise a family there?
About 13.
13 years. Okay,
Yes.
that gives us kind of some context here. And so you weren't fully American, but you weren't obviously Saudi national. So you were living sort of in the in between land. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. And I'm sure you've probably talked about, the whole third culture kid thing, how I your first culture is American, your second culture is Saudi, but then the third culture is that compound, that those people that are part of your community. And that was such a part of my reality for so long.
Sure.
And then to not have that, I feel like is the hardest thing about
It's a
moving
loss.
back.
Yes, it's a huge loss.
Yes.
Having had it
Yes.
and then
Yes.
not to have it is an amazing loss.
Yes.
But you've mentioned you have a brother and a sister, is that correct?
I have two sisters and a brother.
Two
So I'm the
sisters.
oldest. And
Uh-huh.
then yes, I'm the oldest. And then I have two sisters and a younger brother.
And how old were they when the family left Saudi Arabia? Were they younger than you?
Yes. Yes. So they
Okay.
were in grade school and junior high. And then, yeah, my brother, I feel like it really, it was really hard. It was hard on all of us, but I really feel like for him, he was like the star of the soccer team and he was so, amazing and everything. And when we moved back and he tried out for the soccer team, he didn't even make it.
Yeah.
And so those were the things that were just heartbreaking and just
Devastating.
really, really hard, really, really difficult.
Mm. And how about your sisters? How old were they when they moved home?
So they would have been, so my sister, I want to say seventh and ninth grade, I think. Yeah. And so when we moved back, it was 86. It was, everything during that time, it was a really difficult time to move back to the States
Yeah.
because they were doing tons of layoffs. Um, my parents had been part of they had put a lot of savings into a dinner theater. And, my dad would get hired on with a company, and then he would be the first one let go because they were doing layoffs. And so he was such a hard worker. And I just remember it was so hard because he ended up doing, it makes me a tiny bit emotional because he ended up doing things like he was a night watchman, and and then another time he worked at the grocery store in the meat department. And it was, all of those things are noble jobs, but it was so weird to go
Yes.
from having him, go to work in the morning and home at lunch and then back to work and, and then have these like piecemeal jobs to get by. It was a really, really difficult time.
Very challenging. And how did your siblings do? How did they react to moving home?
So we were here for a few years, and my dad, was going through that whole cycle of being hired and then let go and then hired and then let go. And so he finally decided to look at getting a job back overseas, and he was hired to help build the American embassy in Cyprus.
Yes.
And when my parents asked them if they had a school there, they said no, they didn't have a school. But they actually did, but they didn't know that, I guess. And so they didn't have an American school, is what they didn't have.
Okay.
So my parents thought my brother was really young, so he was going to go with my parents to Cyprus. And my sisters, they went into boarding school, which in their minds that was fine for them. They were fine because growing up in Saudi, you knew that was part of the deal. So they then got to
Yes.
go to boarding school.
They'd been programmed to go to
Yeah.
boarding school.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, I know for some people, they are like boarding school, but from when you're living there, that was one of the things that they were really sad about missing out on when we had to move back.
Yes.
So they went to boarding school, but so they had been in high school here, in junior high and high school here, and then they went to boarding school. But my younger sister, we didn't know this. She's very outgoing, and like everybody loves her. And she's just a really magnetic personality. And we didn't realize at the time that she was really, really struggling. And I can remember like driving around with my mom, and I don't know if my brother was in the car, but I know my sisters were in the car. And we were talking to my mom, and I was trying to tell her, like, you don't understand. We're not making friends here. Like, something is wrong. like,
Yes.
none of us are making connections, and it was so hard to explain the depth of what was happening. And anyway, my sister Danielle was very, very, very depressed, and we didn't know it. She was covering it up. And so she, on the outside, was, on the cheerleading team and doing all this stuff, but she was really struggling with connecting. And thank God, my sister Melissa, who was at school with her, she knew something was off. And so she asked Danielle, and Danielle said, nothing's wrong, nothing's wrong. And anyway, she went into her room when Danielle had gone to class, and she found a note that Danielle had written. And it was basically a suicide note. And what had happened was she had made a plan the night before. She always would stay up later than her roommate. And so she had a whole bunch of pills, and she was going to take them. And that night, her roommate stayed up late. And that was what basically
saved her.
Anyway, so my sister Melissa turned her in. She was
That takes courage.
immediately, oh my gosh, totally. And she went into a facility in Colorado Springs and was treated for depression. And anyway, that was the first time when we ended up going through family counseling. And it was the first time that it was put into words. The counselor said, you guys are all grieving, and you're all grieving on your own. You're all dealing with this in your own way. And I hadn't really realized, he said it's like a death.
It is.
And I hadn't realized until that moment the depth of how serious everything was. And also the other thing was that I was older. So like I had gone through school there. I mean, I had gone through boarding school, and I had gone, I was going to college and all of these things. But my younger siblings, that was a really difficult time for them to leave, a very difficult time for them to leave. That just proved very, very difficult. And it showed me the depth of grief that we were experiencing.
Yeah. Now, when you were going through family counseling, that was a very sort of a brave and radical thing to do back then, wasn't it? I recently interviewed someone who is a counselor helping families move through this stage.
Rangers.
And then I've also talked to coaches recently who support people through not such challenging situations, but national transitions. So that must have taken a lot of courage for your family to do this.
It didn't necessarily feel like that, because we were all in survival mode with my sister.
Yeah.
She was in the hospital, I think, for like 6 months. She wasn't even able to come home for Christmas. I mean, it was really serious. It was really serious. And she was very angry because she didn't succeed. And so we, at that point, really realized how serious all of it was. So, and I feel, it's hard for me because I really feel like that's not something that you really want to talk about a lot. But in my times when I've done third culture kid seminars and stuff, I always make sure to let people know about that, because I want for parents to know how intense it is for kids. One of the things that I have recognized that, usually when people come to Saudi, they come to Saudi and they usually will plan to stay 5 years, and they always end up staying longer. Right. And so
that was our plan.
Yeah, exactly. And so you leave home and you go, and let's say your kid is 5 years old. Okay. And you end up staying for 10 years. So that kid is 15 now. All of their memories, all of their like developmental things are at such a, like, that's everything. So you say, where the parent says, okay, well, we're going home now, but the kid, that is their home. And back then it was even more intense because Saudi was a closed country for so many years, and you could not go back. And so it was not the same as if you had grown up in Switzerland and, you were like, hey, you have a boyfriend, or you're getting ready to get married and you want your husband to see, your fiance to see where you grew up. Well, we couldn't do that. And so even now, I think there are so many people, that go to the Aramco reunions and stuff like that. even adults, they really would love to come back, and they would love to,
Absolutely.
and so it's just a very different kind of a place.
Yes, it is. And I hear these sort of stories from people who have been in the military or have been diplomats or have been in extremely different situations overseas, but every single one of them is unique. And Aramco, I think, is unique amongst the unique because
Yeah,
it was such a huge operation. Even when I was there in the 90s and the knots up until 2011, and it was everything was institutionalized. Going to boarding school
right,
was like normal. You start hearing about it in second or third grade because your best friend's siblings are going out to boarding school, that type of thing. So there's this natural progression of life
right,
through all these families, and we're all doing it together.
right,
Then when you leave, you don't have that sense of camaraderie. You don't have
right.
that support, right? So
Well,
we lose a lot.
yes. And I also think one of the things that made it also very difficult for my siblings, especially, was that, when you're older, when you're an adult, you recognize, like, you don't talk about like where you traveled or the things you did when you were living over there, because people don't really get that, and it comes off as being kind of bragging and things like that. And so as an adult, you don't share that, right?
Yeah,
Because they
yeah,
don't they don't really get it. But for kids, I think it's so damaging, because the way that kids connect with other kids their age is through shared experiences.
exactly.
So what happens is, somebody will be talking about spring break, and you have a third grader, and they're like, "Oh, when we did spring break, we went to Thailand." And everybody's like, "Where?" And so what they learn to do is to shut down. They
Exactly.
begin to not share. That is where I feel like so much of depression can come in, because they subconsciously they understand that people don't understand them and don't
Yeah,
get it. So
yeah,
then they just stop talking, and then
yeah.
they shut down.
And I'm writing a book called Unsettled right now. And one of the things I'm talking about is how important it is
Mm,
to tell that story. But you have to be careful with it. It's like a precious baby. You can only really put it in the arms of someone that you trust. You can only put it in the ears
yes,
and eyes of someone who has some experience or some capacity to hear your story.
right,
And those stories, in telling them, I found it to be very healing
yes,
and a sort of a complete circle. And every time I would tell them, but I had to make sure that the person listening was the right place and it was the
yes,
right situation, and not to start by saying, "Oh, when I went to such and such," but more things like. One of the things that I had to learn the hard way when I lived in such and such a place. And
yeah,
through telling the lessons that we've learned and why we are the way we are and how we've become the way we are, and sort
yeah,
of just unfold it like origami, and
right,
unfold it just a little bit at a time, and
right.
that makes it a little more palatable for people to hear those stories.
And I think one of the things that my kids have learned to do also, without even really being coached at all, like if somebody asks them where they're from, and I
Mm.
I did this too,
Yes.
you don't really they don't really want to know, so you just say Denver. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because it's easier than going into the whole Saudi thing, you know.
Yes, it is. And I would listen for years to my daughters. And I was like, when people would ask her, "Where are you from?" I'm like, I wonder what answer is going to come out this time.
Yeah, yeah, it just depends on your audience and who you're talking to. And
Exactly.
one of the other things you had asked me, one of the things that was interesting or shocking to me when about moving back, one of the other things that I found really, really interesting when I would do the TCK talks one of the ladies shared a story with me, and she said that her daughter, she was African American, and when her daughter went to college, she wrote an essay. And the essay was, I never realized I was Black until I moved to America.
Yes.
And I think that our kids growing up have grown up among so many different nationalities, and their best friends are from all over the world. When you come back, there's that's lacking in so many places when you move back. And so yeah, that's been a big challenge too. And just the way that, yeah, we just miss that international flavor.
Absolutely, because it's a different mindset. It's a different pool that you end up swimming in.
Right.
So I have a question. You mentioned you referred to without being coached, your kids come up with this idea. Your kids are now, tell us about your kids. Tell us what age they are now. And then I'm going to ask, I'm very curious about how you're helping with them with their integration into society.
Yes. So Caden is 23 and he's getting ready to turn 23. And then Carson is 20 and Sienna is getting ready to turn 19. So Carson is actually getting ready to turn 21. So yeah,
yes,
it's wild to have them that old. So it's interesting because Caden this summer, so he's an artist and he is waiting to hear about a job overseas. And he was with us when we were in this fantastic little town, little city, I guess I should say, in Mexico. That's very, very artistic. We just loved it. We're looking at that place. Anyway, but we were just having a conversation. And since he's waiting to hear about this job, it was like, what would you think about? Would you want to stay? And he was like, actually, yes. He's very at home in a place where
international
he's,
society. Yes.
yes, he's very at home. I think more so than he would be. And I always say that, I feel so much more, I would feel so much more at home in a little village in India than I would if you dropped me in this tiny little town in Oklahoma.
Right.
I don't understand it, but that is
Yes.
the way it feels.
I feel similarly, and that's why we moved to Mexico.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what sort of preparation have you given these young adults? I mean, I met you when you came and you moved to Saudi Arabia and you stood up in front of the school at some meeting and sort of a parent teacher conference. And you were the first person that I ever heard TCK from.
Mm.
Third Culture Kids. Now we're about to celebrate Ruth Van Reken's birthday. She was the author of Third Culture Kids, and it's her 80th birthday this month. And a whole bunch of people we're going to celebrate in near Chicago. But she wrote this fabulous book, and I went quickly, I went and ordered it. Of course, I don't know if we had internet back then. We had some internet, but it was quite limited. We didn't have Amazon. But you were the first person that introduced me to that concept. And like most people, the penny dropped. I looked at my husband and said, "That's you." And I looked at me and I said, "It's sort of me, but I'm an adult third culture kid. I didn't go overseas until I was 20,
Right.
21. There's a
Right.
difference, but my brain was not formed. My amygdala was still working
Right.
on building itself. So, can you explain to the listeners a little bit about some of the preparation that you have had the benefit of dripping into these three fabulous young people's minds and hearts for all these years because they've gotten the benefit of knowing this since birth?
Yes. And it's actually kind of interesting because they are now, it's kind of a double-edged sword. I would never want to grow up any different, but it also has its challenges,
Yes.
and I think the thing that we have been able to give them is a very international view of the world. I don't know that I can say that I have prepared them in any way. I just I just I've always told them, I don't know where you're going to end up being. I just, we're not going to settle anywhere close to you because you might not, that's not where you might stay. So I feel like they are right in the middle of all of that third culture kid finding their way kind of thing. And, Caden really, all of his friends, he has, I can't think of, he has very few friends that are, that are not from somewhere else,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
just interesting to think about. And then all of my kids, their friends are very international. Actually,
Yes.
Sienna has some friends that are like American. So it's just been an
And
interesting.
they've had the benefit of your perspective. So I was just curious. I've always wanted to ask you that. What are you telling them? What are you whispering to them? How,
I'm more telling them that they need to be looking out for other people. That's kind of what I'm, that they have a obligation to speak up for people. Yeah.
excellent.
So that's my one thing. And when they were little, the one thing that I always prayed for them before they went to school was I would always tell them, whoever is in your path is not there by accident. Whoever is in your path, it doesn't matter if it is the worker or the janitor or the teacher or
Yeah.
whoever it is that you see, that is that you are meant to be kind to them in some way. So it's not really a third culture kid thing. I don't think it's just that mentality of looking out for everybody.
And I think um, it's just building compassion. And I think
Yeah.
that the Saudi Aramco schools, I would say, did a very, very good job of programming compassion. I remember in seventh grade, the kids did they would bring food like rice and all of the things that the houseboys and all the gardeners and everybody that worked at the school.
Right.
That always really struck my heart. And there was so
Right.
many examples of that every month. And
Right.
so I think they naturally grew up in that soup. And we were
Yeah.
very fortunate for that. So
Yes.
back to the subject of repatriation, we've covered a little bit about your kids starting to repatriate. Um, Looking back, do you have a recipe or a tip that you could give people to help them get through the most difficult periods? I mean, did you find some great strategies that adjustment
Um, it
better?
just got really windy. I hope you can hear me. Um, you know, the one thing that I have heard over and over and over again is that one of the best things that people can do is to have like a home base. A lot of kids did so much better on repatriation when they did have to leave if they had grown up coming back for vacation to a house that they knew.
Yes.
And even me as an adult coming back to my parents' house in Littleton, there's that
Grounding.
the familiar. Yeah. Yeah. And so even though I don't have a ton of roots here, I still, I was driving around the other day and I just feel more comfortable here.
It's
And so
familiar. Yes.
yes, it is familiar. The only other thing the other thing that I would mention is that I think a lot of kids feel lost when they come back. And one of the things that I have understood sometimes is helpful, especially in college, is if they join like an international students kind of club kind of thing.
Yes.
That a lot of times will really, really help, because there's that common ground of being out of step, I guess.
Yes.
And so they bond better like that. Yeah.
That really helped. Well, these are very, very, I really appreciate you, number one, being so authentic and willing to share your family story. I think your
Yeah.
family story is of value to so many people who are supersizing their lives by becoming expats suddenly without
Yeah.
understanding that there is a recovery or a consequence to
Yeah.
this great expansion that we enjoy, right?
Right. And the other thing that I would mention is that um, one of the things that I have counseled people as they leave is to let their kids know that they understand them. That even if they're in a place and they feel like nobody else gets it, to let your kids know that you are that safe place for them, because when we came back, we just didn't know what was going on.
Yes.
We just had no idea. And it was interesting because I didn't realize the extent of what was happening until my parents moved to Cyprus, and I met a missionary, and the missionary said, I think you should read this book. And it was The Third Culture Kid Experience by Pollock. I remember reading that book and being like, oh my gosh, this is me. Holy cow, that is my sister. That is my brother. It was, and it wasn't that I needed a label. It wasn't that it was that I needed to be understood, or I needed to understand, because it was such a foreign feeling. I couldn't understand what was happening. And
Yes.
once I understood the dynamics of everything, it it just was like a light bulb. It was a light bulb
Well,
moment. Yeah. And the only other thing that I really want to make sure that people know is that, like, there are so many benefits to a third culture kid experience. And it doesn't necessarily mean that when you come back, you're going to be depressed or your kid's going to be a suicidal or whatever. But there does need to be so much forethought into the timing of when you transition,
yes,
and also just having some things in place for them, because
definitely.
yeah, it's just important.
It's very important. I'm not sure we did that well. Um, I would say I would have to own up to the fact that I probably didn't do that well because Lindsay graduated she graduated from boarding school at Fountain Valley in Colorado as John was retiring. And so
Mm,
no, he wasn't retiring. He was going to work in Houston. But we were
mm,
moving to the States. She was saying goodbye to Saudi forever and going straight off to university. So we were all splintered in three different places around the country. I don't think I realized how tough that was to sort of close that door and never be able to go back and look back while we were also leaving because she did not have that option to ever go back home again. Because
right.
we had closed down our house, we had exited, we had our visas, we were gone, and John finished with Saudi Aramco, but went on to another project in Houston. So that was challenging. Not sure that I did that well. However, I would definitely be with you and really respect the natural way that you just tell your story. I mean, it's just like very matter of fact. And I think that many more expats need to hear this story told in this manner. Like, it's not a cry. It doesn't have to be dramatic. However, it's a sensitive period that you need to plan for, and you need to plan for, and you need to help your kids through it.
One of the other things that was really, really interesting was when I moved back to Saudi, I was going into the elementary school, and one of the ladies who was the secretary there, or she was the one at the front desk, I had known her as a kid. Her name was Maureen Southworth, and her kids do you know her?
Yes.
And her, so I knew her kids when they were little, and so it was interesting to me because my gut was that if you had like been in Saudi and grown up there and went to college and your parents were still there and you went through that, you would have this natural kind of, Mom, I've got a girlfriend. I'm not going to come home for Christmas this year, or, you know what I mean? I'm getting a job, or I'm doing this or whatever. I asked her about her kids, and her kids had all kind of transitioned out of Saudi, right?
Yes.
Whereas so many kids, when you had to leave at such an early age, they've always missed it. And they've always been sad that they had to leave.
Yes.
And so even just recently, I had a friend, I'm still in contact with a lot of brats that I've grown up with. And one of my earliest friends, I've known her since first grade. And she called me, and she's over 50 now, and she was like, I just would love to go back. I just really feel like it's just my home, and you're so lucky to live there and everything. Yeah. And it's just so interesting because it's a part of who you are. And it's a part that nobody understands really, unless you've been there.
Yeah.
And that's why it was so important that Jeff get to experience it,
Yes. And he's been such an amazing dad to watch throughout the years, enjoying it to the fullest and playing the dick and the pantomime and just living life full out 100% in Arabia, and knowing that, we all move through it because time takes us through it, whether we love it or not. So we're going to have to wrap this up. This has been a wonderful conversation. I know that you're going to come back and talk to us a bit more about the whole third culture kid experience.
Yes.
And I really am very grateful to you for being so frank and so open and so honest in your consideration of the topic, and the beautiful way you've raised your kids to be handling this as naturally as possible.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate, I appreciate you asking me. I'm honored that you would ask me for the interview, but I also just really feel so strongly that it's a really important topic. It's very, very important. The transition back is such an important topic.
Yes. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll send you a copy of the book.
Thank you so much.
That's a wrap on today's Nomadic Diaries. If this episode moved you, share it with someone whose world could use a little support or a little expanding. Subscribe wherever you listen, and come find me at nomadicdiaries.com. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and by all means, keep developing your story.